Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the third week of a four-week series entitled Understanding the Cultural and Ethnic Diversity of the Spokane Area People. As you know from our first two programs, we're dealing with a very important and a very serious topic, and one that we believe will bring further discussions to this very important issue in the future. On the third program, we wish to discuss the topic, victims of racism. In order to accomplish that goal, I'm happy to welcome to the program two guests who will be very informative with you today. To my far left is Rod Holmes, who is an employee of the city of Spokane, Washington, and is active in this community in dealing with this very important area of human rights. Rod, it's a pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you.
Our second guest is Mr. John Reese, who is the supervisor of materials management and stores at Washington Water Power, and he is sure to represent the American Indian community as we discuss this issue. And John, like Rod, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the program.
Thank you.
We will have two panel members today to question our guests and to be with us throughout this series. To my immediate left is Idaho State Senator Mary Lou Reed, who is a regular member of the panel. And next to her is former state representative from Idaho, Jeannie Givens. And I would like to indicate once again that Jeannie Givens is serving an internship with Whitworth College and has put this series together, and we're very grateful to her for all the work that she has done. And we would like to invite Jeannie Givens to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. Welcome, Rod and John, to our program on victims. Assimilation is a word that's been used for quite a while, and I think that it is something that requires minorities perhaps to be more like the dominant society, white people. Do you think that that's fair, John?
It is not fair, and when I think of the word assimilation, I think of they commonly say that America and Spokane is a melting pot, and that indicates that everybody has assumed the same identity, so to speak. I would rather refer to Spokane and America as being more of a smorgasbord where each plate out on the table has a different flavor to it and a different look to it, and each one of those would represent a different culture, and those cultures exist out there. There is not a melting pot or assimilation, and unfortunately the people of these minority races are expected to pick that plate on the table, which is the Western white culture, and they must understand it and fully agree with it in order to work their way in and become a success in life. And unfortunately, there is no reversal of that. The white culture out there, the people within that Caucasian group, are not expected to learn any of these other plates on the table.
Mm-hmm. So you see that as pretty much one way?
It is definitely one way, definitely.
Rod, what do you think?
Well, I disagree a little bit with John's analogy of the situation. I do see the United States as a melting pot with a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of different kinds of cultures, and I think that everyone needs to hang on to those sorts of things. But I think it's important, maybe assimilation isn't the appropriate word, but I think for example, if everyone in this country only spoke the native language of the place where they came, we would have multiple languages with no one understanding each other. So it's kind of important, and it's a good thing for us to have one language so we can all communicate, but I think it's nice for people to be bilingual so that they can, hang on to what they had, but then we can all work and harmonize. I think it's more of an attitude of wanting everyone to change and fit into this one mold and not to hang on. I think that's bad. If you look at assimilation as changing your total background, whether it's ethnic, religion, to this way and not being able to hang on to what you have, I think that would be wrong. But I think assimilation, as far as being able to go and work and everyone get along and be able to communicate, is good. But to lose your ethnic heritage or your ability to have your own identity would be bad if that's a part of assimilation. So I see it just like as if you should always. I think we should celebrate all our differences, You know, and the fact that we are all different, we all have different backgrounds, different religious beliefs, different social beliefs, but I think that we should all be able to work and do things in one frame of mind. It's like people going into the military or whatever. They have these rules, but you know, when they have their own time, then they can go and be themselves. So I don't look at it as a bad thing, totally.
Mary Lou Reed.
Well, gentlemen, what do you think drives the people who seem to be behind the forces of hate? What kind of people and what kind of motivation do you think pushes the victimizers, the people who are going to commit malicious harassment crimes? What do you think, Rob?
Well, I think that those kinds of attitudes prey on certain parts of people's weaknesses. For example, I think if you notice that whenever the economy is at an all-time low, that these types of things seem to flourish. If someone feels badly, you know, they're out of work, they're not being able to pay their bills. I mean, they feel badly. They don't want to look at themselves and blame themselves. It's easier to look and blame someone or something else, the government, you know, or Jewish people or black people. And I think that's what happens. There's a constant need for us to find some other outlet for our problems. I think if suddenly tomorrow God made us all green, then after a certain amount of time, it would be, boy, I just can't stand those tall green people. You know, I think that's all a part of it. But I think that what we need to do, the more education and the more willingness that people have, and as from a minority, I feel it's very important that in any movement we have white people, Indians, Chicanos, that we should all do it together. And then you can stop a lot of things that happen. The more and more we educate people, because people are afraid of what they don't know. And because we're all different, you know, we should teach people that different is good. And right now I think that those groups flourish because they preach that different is bad.
What do you think, John? What's your response?
I would be naive to think that there's one sort of person out there that practices racism. I think there's such a broad spectrum, all the way from the young child in a school setting who knows what chain to pull with his friend and neighbor, and he might say some racist remark to him because he knows it'll send him right through the ceiling. And he may or may not know exactly what the meaning of those words are that he's saying, but there's all the way up to those people that are completely consumed by the hatred that this thing will have. They are consumed to the point that they will go out into the woods and march and carry weapons and wear swastikas on their arms, or they will shave their heads, or this sort of thing. This is a complex problem with very complex solutions to it. You know, it's unfortunate that we only have a half an hour to delve into this broad range of things. But that's the kind of people that are involved in this racism problem. I do believe that they are only a few out there, and I would really like to believe that there is a multitude of fine, upstanding citizens out there that don't carry around any of this hatred whatsoever.
Well, what do you think's behind something like cross-burning? I mean, do you think there's a need here for ritual? I agree with you, it's very complex, except that they seem to focus in on a number of intimidating ideas and actions that really do cause fear, and that seems to be all part and parcel, the symbolism and the fear.
When I was in the service, when I was in the Army, I was in a psychological warfare group, and we had propaganda that we would display for all of the troops so that they would understand it. I understand propaganda, and I understand exactly what's going on with these cross-burnings and everything. If they could portray that fear and scar the people deeply enough and carry around weapons and things like this, it sort of legitimizes those people in the center who are not quite such strong bigots or don't display this thing. They can now say, I'm not a racist because I'm not carrying around a weapon, and I'm not marching, and I don't have that swastika on my arm. It legitimizes it, and it brings them out of the closet, and these people are spreading this propaganda in a way so that they can bring more people out of the woodwork. I honestly believe that.
Did you want to respond to that too?
Well, and I agree with pretty much what John said. I think that the key word is, it's not a ritual, I mean, in a sense that like a religious ceremony or whatever, but I think that it's a ritual because they found over the years, and we've had the Klan and cross burnings in this country for a very long time, and they've learned that if you do things, you know, especially by cover of night, and you do things to people without them having the ability to, you know, have you arrested or have you stopped, these things keep happening, that you create a certain amount of fear, and with enough fear you can control people. And I think that's the whole basis for these kinds of activities, is to create fear, is to create mistrust, you know, and I still believe that we still need to deal in this country with more understanding. And starting with politicians and everyone else, we can't only react to these situations after we have a multitude of things happen. You can't start discussing the Klan, white supremacists, or anybody after they've burned so many crosses, they've written so many letters. These things, we have to be able to discuss these things and stop them before they happen, to set up organizations and programs before they happen, rather than to react. You know, we do everything in a reactionary manner. You know, enough of these things have happened now. Enough people have called me or sent me letters and let me know how they feel. I guess now I can feel free to do something about humanism, and that's scary to me. That's one thing that I think we need to stop.
I would like to pursue that. John and I had a discussion prior to the show, actually last week, and Rod, you building that bridge for us. When we hear the word victims, and we often instantly think of those terrible violent acts, which are just absolutely must be dealt with in the harshest terms, that when we have victims, murders take place, or people are beaten because of their race, religion, color, so forth. But we talked, John, last week about another type of victim, and that has to do with what's going on such a common basis around the world all the time, and that is this, what you've mentioned concerning psychological damage that takes place. And I tell students oftentimes that there's two ways of murdering someone. One of them is physically, and we recognize that very immediately and deal with it, but there's a psychological murder. And with that introduction, would you start and have Rod also address this kind of victims in our society and explain to our audience the depth of that problem?
There is a covert type of racism that exists. Some of it on purpose, and some of it where the individual who is perpetrating the crime doesn't really realize that they're doing. It's kind of undercover. It is commonly referred to as institutionalized racism. And if we were to dissect this and look at the portions of it, if you could visualize, say, a company that is doing some hiring, and the individual who is hiring is of a certain race, a certain height, his appearance is a certain way, he always wants to bring somebody into that company who is a clone of himself. Once a person of a different race is able to break through this and they get into the company, he may only be able to get up to a certain level within that company because he doesn't look like the typical plate on that smorgasbord that we talked about earlier. I myself even think of the key to success as somebody about 6'2", weighing 200 pounds with wire glasses and wearing a very conservative pinstripe suit with a tie like this, rather than somebody that looks a little bit different, you see. But when I think a little deeper, I say, no, the talent of that individual and so on. This is the key to success. Well, often out there in the cruel world, as I would like to call it now, there is that covert, not seen, not easy to put your finger on it sort of racism that takes place that keeps the average person out. Now, I would also be naive to think that it doesn't happen on a little stronger basis where people actually do not want to hire. I know that takes place. But all of those kinds of things, whether it be keeping people from moving into a certain district of town, whether it be not letting them stay at public accommodations, whether it be not giving them credit at the bank, things like this, exist. They are definitely out there. You know, it's unfortunate. I would like to hope to think that, you know, when the tree bends, that it becomes a little stronger and all of us can forget about the past and go on and try to make things better for ourselves in the future. But we need to have a lot of help. We're the only ones out there. The minorities are raising their hand and saying, help, we need help, we have this problem, but nobody's coming to our rescue. We need a lot of whites along with us to get us through that, that covert type activity that's taking place.
Thank you. Rod?
Well, I see a lot of, a multitude of problems that we have. Speaking of here, living here in Spokane, one of the first things, stumbling blocks that we have here in Spokane is, well, all those things happen. They happen in Los Angeles, they happen in Chicago, they happen in, you know, in the southern states. We don't have a problem here. We have the same problems here, but because the numbers, the whole population of minorities in Spokane is only like about 3%. That isn't very many people. So the voices are small, but those things happen. We have institutional racism here. I moved to this town in 1976 as a child, or 1966 as a child, and we moved to a neighborhood not picking, you know, or trying to find out where the blacks live. You know, my father came here, got a house, and we moved in. We were only here 2 weeks, and there were petitions to get us out of the neighborhood. Not because we were doing anything, but purely because we moved to the wrong neighborhood. You know, that was hard coming. I'm originally from the South, where we had segregated schools. You had to ride in the back of the bus. And I felt more comfortable in that situation because I grew up in it, so you knew what to expect, than coming here to Spokane and having people go, oh, it's real nice to see you, you know, glad you moved to Spokane, and then you go away and they go, oh my God, what are we going to do with these black people? We got to get them out of here. You know, and there's overt and there's covert. And for my own personal beliefs, I have an easier time dealing with overt prejudice. I can deal with the people from Rathdrum. I know how they feel, you know, I know how they're going to react. You know, I don't like what they do, and I don't like what they believe, but I know them, you know, so I can react to them. The person I can is someone who's covert. You go in, you fill out a job application. Very friendly, very nice, you leave. No matter what your qualifications are, the application goes in the garbage. You can't deal with that because you don't know if it's happening or not. And that's, to me personally, the overt is much harder to deal with than the covert. But I think one of the biggest things in this city, and maybe even in this state, is refusing to realize that we have the same problems here they have other places. And I think we need to address those kind of situations.
Thank you. Jeannie Givens?
Well, Rod, let's stay on that subject that you were talking about. We have the difference with the very graphic cross-burning or tire slashing or bombs into cars of people, the destruction of the private property. But how would you assess where the city of Spokane is right now, just in the area of employment? Let's look at our educational institutions, let's look at our city government, let's look at all of those things. Let's look at the news media. Do you think that minorities get a fair shake in this town?
All right, I'll jump in first so John can finish up, but my answer is no. Because of the failing to realize the problems that we do have. In my particular job, for example, I am the only black person out of almost 330 people. Now, there's a problem with that because in the particular area I'm in administration, I'm not visible. I'm not a visible identifier for minorities. And because most of the minorities are transported into this town, they come from somewhere else, they usually, they go, they look around, and they see, now, where can minorities work? Where do I see minorities? And if you don't see people, then you assume automatically that there's either institutional racism or there's some problem why those people are not there. So therefore, you're not going to go and apply for a job that you automatically know that you're going to be refused. You know, so you may want to expand a little more, John. I don't know, we have a limited amount of time.
It's there. The leaders in our community have to take a positive role in changing this. The president of Washington Water Power got up in front of the whole staff group and said, I refuse to let any sort of discrimination take place in our company. I would like to see every company in the entire area here do exactly that. I would like to see the city council, the county government get up there and declare that we not tolerate this anymore. As a matter of fact, the great crime in this area, this whole town, this whole community is public apathy, I'd like to call it. Our community has blinders on. There's a great denial that there's a problem out there. And as a result, you know, it wasn't by pure happenstance that these racist groups have, these hate groups have moved into our area. It's because of that blindness. They knew that they could move in here unmolested. It's that blindness that has made Spokane a drug capital, so to speak, for the West Coast. People need to stand up and take a stand and say, I will no longer tolerate this in our community. And the minorities can't do that alone. We have to have a coalition of everybody in the city making those statements, and then we're going to be out of this, I hope.
Mary Lou Reed.
Well, how effective do you think the human rights groups in Spokane are being in combating racism? Do you want to start with that, John? Are they on the right track? I mean, you're talking about the need for knowledge, education, prevention. Are they doing enough?
They're on the right track, and they're not doing enough. The community, the state has not come along to educate people, to let them know about the differences in the races as well as the similarities and that sort of thing. And maybe these communities, the Indians, the blacks, the Hispanics, and the Asians, should take it upon themselves to take that role of educating everybody so that they are feeling a little bit more comfortable about their dealings with the races. Mm-hmm. Maybe they should go one step further. However, the groups are talking to one another, but it's such a small community. We need to have help there.
What do you think, Rod?
Well, I think in my lifetime, some of the more drastic changes that I've seen happened in the late 60s, early 70s. And I think a large reason for all those things happening was all the different issues all together at once that forced large amounts of people to gather together. The Vietnam War, civil rights. There were such numbers that they affected change. And I think then we went through a period of everyone apathy again. Everything's great, we don't have to do anything else. So they stopped. And then everyone went to the business of living, you know, husband and wives, both people having to work so they could pay for everything, to where you had apathy or strong beliefs about something with no ability to do anything because I don't have enough time or whatever. And I think even now with these things coming up, and we have a little group here doing something and a little group here doing something, they end up being special interest groups. I think if we were to look at everything, all the problems with Indians, problems with Orientals, problems with blacks, problems with women, you know, problems with gay people or whatever, and looked at that as a human issue and put us all together. I mean, maybe you could have your little group of meetings, but try to gather all those people together to work on issues together in large numbers with a voice, then I think we'd be more effective. The more and more little groups we get for our little special interests, the more it defeats the purpose of what you want to do.
Needs to be, you're saying, it really needs to be a multi-purpose coalition. Do you think that Martin Luther King Day and television and the spotlight on these issues is helping?
No. In my opinion, whenever Martin Luther King's birthday comes up in my employment or even with my friends, is there go the blacks again wanting another day off. You know, rather than looking at not necessarily the man, but the reason for wanting to celebrate his philosophy rather than his birthday. Maybe that's what we should have. Instead of celebrating Washington's birthday or Lincoln's we should celebrate a day of a certain kind of philosophy.
We're just about out of time. We have like 4 minutes left, but I want to get back, Rod, to your comments on overt activities. When people do such things, this happens so common, engage in racial jokes. You even see cartoons in sources that you wouldn't think you'd see them that are ethnic oriented just all the time. And when you have that reinforcement over and over, what is that doing to society? And continuing this racism? And secondly, what's it doing to the individuals that must share that every day and to their self-esteem? If you could address that.
Well, and I'm glad you asked me that because it was a point I wanted to get across earlier and I could never fit it in. But I think that what happens is, you know, you and I work together and you come in every day and you've got, you know, a black joke to tell me that I may or may not want to hear. And this goes on day after day, week after week, month after month. And most of the time I've been able to either ignore it or allow it to happen. But one day I come in, you know, the wife left me, you know, the kids are on drugs, you know, I haven't made my car payment. Now I'm not receptive to jokes or fun. Now you tell that to me, and it hurt me before, but not only does it hurt me, but I'm angry at you, so I'm going to do something back to you now. It creates an intolerable situation. And I would like to see us all, because we don't know how things affect people. I think we should all try to concentrate on not doing racial jokes, religious jokes. You know, we need to learn how to deal with each other on a more equal human basis and care about how the other person feels, you know, about something, you know, whether they like them or don't like them. Eliminate them completely out of your life. Then you don't have to deal with the problem of offending or not offending.
Yeah, we're just running out of time, but also isn't it an important note to make that those jokes are directed at these particular groups, and can't you ask the question, why do certain groups never get those jokes? That shows the attempt, I think, at superiority through that method. I wish we could continue this. It's been so informative. I know the panel joins me in indicating how informative the program it's been, and you have really set a very important note for next week's program, when we will have a group of citizens in from throughout Spokane County, and at that time we're going to talk about Spokane people making a difference, and you have made that suggestion, and we would like to hear from them in how we go about doing that. Again, we thank you, we appreciate your time, and again, Jeannie Gibbons, thank you for producing this program. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been discussing once again our overall topic of understanding the cultural and ethnic diversity of the Spokane area people, and as I indicated, we have one more week on this program. We hope you will tune in. We hope you've been with us every week, because all these programs tie together. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.